Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Friday, January 17th. Chrystia Freeland is pledging not to back down from Donald Trump's tariffs threats should she be the next leader of the Liberal Party and Prime Minister of Canada. Ms. Freeland wrote an op-ed in the Toronto Star that she's launching her campaign officially on Sunday. The former finance minister was a key player in responding to Trump tariffs during his first term in the White House, overseeing a dollar-for-dollar tariff response to Mr. Trump's imposition of import taxes in 2018. Her announcement comes after former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney officially launched his campaign to become the next Liberal leader yesterday. And Mark Carney says he knows he's not the only Liberal who thinks the Prime Minister and his team let their attention wander from the economy. Carney launched his Liberal leadership bid in Edmonton, where he grew up and played hockey. The former Bank of Canada governor told supporters political and economic systems aren't working as they should, and Canadians are struggling. He also criticized both Pierre Poilievre and the far left.
We can't achieve our full potential with the ideas of the far left. They too often see government as the solution to every problem, with a reflex to spend and subsidize that just treats the symptoms of the problems, but doesn't cure the disease. We can't redistribute what we don't have, and we can't support the vulnerable in our society or defend this great country if we have a weak economy.
Liberal strategist Andrew Perez joined us to unpack Mr. Carney's announcement.
I think it was an interesting speech. I think Carney is really trying to build support in the center of the political spectrum, openly acknowledging in this launch speech that the Liberals have drifted too much to the left. They haven't focused enough on economic growth. And I think that really speaks to a broad cross-section of Canadians, especially young people, that aren't able to get into the housing market, aren't able to secure oftentimes permanent employment. And polling has been very consistent that the young demographic has actually shifted to the Conservative Party, which is unprecedented when you look at polling trends in this country. And so I think Carney is trying to go for that radical center. And he even alluded to the radical left in that speech. So I think that was very interesting. Some have speculated that Carney is the early front runner in this race. I think it's premature to say that. Freeland will launch her leadership bid on Sunday. She's already got about 20 members of parliament lined up behind her. Members of parliament from the business wing of the party, from the more socially progressive wing of the party. I don't expect that you'll see major ideological cleavages or differences between these two candidates. I expect that both of them will tack to the center. You've already seen Freeland tease out that she'll be promising to scrap the consumer carbon tax. And you've heard Carney on several occasions in recent weeks speak about the affordability crisis, speak about how the consumer carbon tax might not be the best option moving forward, but that we need to replace it with something, with a program that can fight climate change. And so I also know that there are reports that suggest that Carney, as part of his leadership campaign, will be running on a major middle-income tax cut. So we'll see how this shapes up. I think these are the two major contenders, Carney and Freeland, and I suspect absent ideological differences, this is going to come down to rough and tumble politics, signing up members, having a cross-country organization. And I think both of them will really focus on the question of leadership. Who has the experience and the CV to come into power at this very precarious time in our history, to go toe-to-toe with the Trump administration, to really fight and protect Canadian jobs, and who would perhaps provide a better contrast to the Poilievre Conservatives. And so that's what I expect this leadership race to be about.
Israel's security cabinet has recommended approval of a ceasefire deal after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed an agreement had been reached that would pause the 15-month war with Hamas in Gaza and release dozens of hostages held by militants there. Mediators in Qatar and the U.S. announced the ceasefire on Wednesday, but the deal hung in limbo for more than a day as Mr. Netanyahu insisted there were last-minute snags. After the recommendation Friday, the deal now goes to the full cabinet of ministers for final sign-off. It is expected to okay the ceasefire, and it could start as soon as Sunday. All right, stay tuned. Up next, BC's premier claims that Trump has made a declaration of economic war on Canada. After that, we'll have more news from across Canada and around the world. Stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after these messages. BC Premier David Eby says that U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has made a declaration of economic war on Canada with his proposed 25% tariffs on Canadian goods.
Than a week away from the inauguration of President-elect Trump, who has made repeated declarations of economic war on Canada and British Columbia. The Minister of Finance and her team have been working since November 25th, when the threat was first made on the President's Truth Social network, to analyze how this will affect us and ensure that we are prepared as a province to respond comprehensively, effectively, and protect you and your families from this economic threat.
Mr. Eby and Finance Minister Brenda Bailey say that the tariffs and a similar response from Canada would cost BC up to $69 billion in lost GDP by 2028. The costings also estimate 124,000 fewer jobs in the province by 2028, and that the unemployment rate would also rise. The preliminary assessment by the Ministry of Finance also suggests that corporate profits in BC would decline $6 billion this year. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister gave an update today on Canada's efforts to stop punishing U.S. tariffs, stating that if tariffs are imposed, it would create the biggest trade war between the two countries in decades.
Well, I think that we're taking these tariff threats very, very seriously because we know that the impacts on Canadians would be really, really, really difficult. And why I'm saying that is we know that there would be lots of job loss across the country. And we know that this would also have an impact on cost of living for Canadians. I won't go into the details of what that figure is like, but definitely we have numbers that are highlighting how much this could be devastating. This would be basically starting a trade war. The Americans would be starting a trade war against us, and this would be the biggest trade war between Canada and U.S. in decades.
Melanie Joly is meeting with both Republicans and Democrats in Washington in the run-up to Donald Trump taking the White House and imposing his promised 25% tariffs on all products coming from Canada and Mexico. Also in Washington, Energy and Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson says no one really knows what Mr. Trump is thinking. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke in Windsor, Ontario on Thursday, reacting to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's refusal to sign an agreement from all premiers to stand together after a meeting between premiers and the federal government. He said that while it's Ms. Smith's job to stand up for the interests and industries of her province, it's also part of her job to put her country first.
I don't blame Danielle Smith for speaking up for her industry. That's part of her job. But every single premier other than Danielle Smith then chose to put Canada first and say, but we're all part of Team Canada because what happens to any part of us happens to all of us, and we will be there to respond strongly, to fight for Canada, and to do it in a united way that makes sure that it's fair across all industries, across all regions. That was what we came together yesterday to do. Now, I could point to any number of those premiers and point out lots of moments in which they have points of disagreement with me. From Doug Ford to Scott Moe to Tim Houston to even David Eby and Wab Kinew and others. There's all sorts of disagreements we're going to have. But when push comes to shove, every single one of them are Canadians first. And yes, they're going to look out for their communities, but they also know that looking out for all of us is what everyone in their communities expect us to do.
SpaceX is investigating the loss of their spacecraft during a test flight. The company says their Starship broke apart, describing it as a rapid, unscheduled disassembly. Preliminary analysis points to leaking fuel building up pressure in a cavity above the engine firewall. It was the 7th test flight for the world's biggest and most powerful rocket. President-elect Donald Trump says that he talked with Chinese leader Xi Jinping about TikTok shortly before the Supreme Court unanimously upheld the federal law banning the app beginning Sunday unless it's sold by its China-based parent company. On Friday, the court held that the risk to national security posed by TikTok's ties to China overcomes concerns about limiting speech by the app or its 170 million users in the U.S. A sale does not appear imminent. The court's decision means new users won't be able to download the app and updates won't be available, but it won't disappear from users' phones. All right, stay with us. Up next, we'll have our weekly medical segment with Dr. Abhishek Raut from Apple Tree Medical Group. After that, we'll be joined by Dan McTeague for our energy update. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. A neurovirus outbreak at the University of Guelph has been tearing through student housing and has now made more than 240 people sick. Wellington Dufferin Guelph Public Health says that all of the reports by mostly students over the past week, only one positive neurovirus case has been confirmed so far. A statement on the university's website says that the school has stepped up its cleaning of high-touch surfaces and temporarily moved away from offering large-scale social programs for residents' communities to help slow the spread of any illnesses. I'm now joined by Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director at Apple Tree Medical Group, to unpack this further. Dr. Raut, thank you for joining me today.
Great to be here.
Now, would you mind explaining what norovirus is and how the illness found itself on the University of Guelph campus?
Well, norovirus is a highly contagious virus that causes gastroenteritis, which is basically inflammation of the stomach and intestines. We often call it the winter vomiting bug because it's so common in the colder months. And we have our usual nausea, vomiting, stomach pain, diarrhea, and sometimes a fever. Now, globally, norovirus is actually the leading cause of acute gastroenteritis, and estimating 685 million cases annually. It's responsible for about 200,000 deaths each year, with children under 5 being particularly vulnerable. In Canada, norovirus cases have been higher and higher rates when we look at the 5-year average from 2019 to 2023. And the Public Health Agency of Canada has noted this increase in norovirus cases across multiple provinces, including Ontario. And so this recent outbreak at the University of Guelph is really part of this broader trend that we're seeing.
Now, how is the virus contracted? And you did touch on the signs and symptoms of norovirus, but how contagious is it really?
Yeah, so norovirus is highly contagious and can really spread in several ways. Firstly, we see direct contact with an infected person. Secondly, consuming contaminated food or water. And 3, touching contaminated surfaces and then putting your fingers in your mouth. So we do see the similar signs and symptoms that we've described before there: stomach cramps, low-grade fevers, muscle pains, and headaches. But what we do find is norovirus does spread quite easily in these crowded places like universities, schools, nursing homes, and cruise ships, which makes it very challenging to contain when an outbreak occurs. So at the University of Guelph, likely we saw a similar spread through either contaminated surfaces or even close contact with infected individuals.
And you did mention that this virus tends to affect younger children a little bit more. Is there any other group of people more at risk? And it being fatal, at what point should someone seek medical attention?
Yes, we do find that there are certain vulnerable groups, young children, especially because their immune systems are still developing, so it makes it more vulnerable to severe symptoms. Older adults as well, so aging can weaken the immune system, and that makes us more vulnerable. Individuals with weakened immune systems, so chronic illnesses or looking at HIV/AIDS, can certainly have greater vulnerability. And residents of communal living environments, which is what we see here, people living in close quarters, such as students in dormitories, residents of nursing homes, or even passengers in ships, have a much higher risk of contracting and spreading norovirus.
Now, with it being so contagious, what are the best ways that students can avoid contracting the virus? I mean, I'm sure they're all partying and hanging out and doing their thing. So what are ways they can still enjoy university but not contract this virus?
Right. Well, first we have to keep in mind the severe symptoms of it. We can see severe dehydration, vomiting, bloody stools, high fever, severe stomach pain. So when we see that, we certainly want to stay away and seek emergency care. And certainly when we look at students as well, if you have a student or a friend who's experiencing those symptoms, to advise them to go to the hospital there. Aside from that, we see frequent hand washing being very essential. avoiding touching your face, particularly your mouth, nose, and ears to prevent the virus, and staying home when you're sick. All of these play a huge role in decreasing any pandemic spread or any contamination in general.
Now, following the COVID-19 pandemic, universities have now gotten rid of their COVID pandemic restrictions. Do you think universities should keep those restrictions in place to avoid outbreaks like this from happening?
Yes, it's an interesting question. I think what we see is certain practices can be very helpful. So, cleaning and cooking food properly, avoiding contaminated food sources, disinfecting surfaces, proper laundry practices can all play a huge role. Now, we know with the University of Guelph, they've taken several measures as well to mitigate the spread. So, enhanced cleaning and disinfection, postponing large social gatherings, encouraging their own students to wash their hands frequently with soap and warm water, and providing a lot of information on hygiene and best practices. I think those are great ideas to continue doing because it doesn't necessarily hamper or restrict the education of our students at the same time.
Dr. Rope, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, stay tuned. We'll have our weekly energy update with Canadians for Affordable Energy up next. Now it's time for our weekly energy update with Dan McTeague, President of Canadians for Affordable Energy. All yours, Dan.
Well, thank you for this, Teresa. A week in which we, as I predicted last week, are starting to see some pretty significant increases in the price of gasoline. If you look across the country, we have in fact seen, as I had indicated last week, about a 3 or 4 cent increase. So Vancouver's been up about 7, 8 cents a liter. Not many people paying attention to that and finding excuses not to consider it. Calgary, Edmonton, so much of Alberta up about 5 cents a liter. Ditto for Saskatchewan. Of course, Manitoba is still in the 145 range. And of course, Ontario now pushing a little bit towards the 160 range, but 159, 158. The only difference being in many cities across Ontario, especially Southern Ontario, retailers are giving away their 8% retail margins. They're sometimes charging only 3 or 4 cents a liter. So that's why you see prices a little lower. It's a bit of a head fake because sooner or later they have to come up for air. They have to honor credit cards. That's 2 cents a liter. They have to honor, loyalty programs. That might be another penny a liter or 2 or 3 or 4, depending on what it is. They have to turn on their pumps, pay for their staff. You can't do that on 3 cent liter retail margins if you're only selling 15, 20,000 liters a day. I don't care who you are. Sooner or later, you have to come up for air unless you're going to overcharge people on the beef jerky inside your C stores. Quebec will do the same thing, usually about 10 cents a liter more. They're in the 168, 169 range. It varies between Quebec and Montreal. And Atlantic Canada, which saw a pretty big increase, 4 cents a liter for gasoline and 8 cents a liter for diesel. And diesel's the big issue of the week because no matter how you look at it, no matter how much U.S. Refiners are keeping up and producing more. The fact is they're using a lot of U.S. Their oil inventories dropping dramatically. 8 weeks in a row, we've seen a decrease. They're now about 6 or 7% below the 5-year average in terms of inventories. That's a very dangerous situation, and it's likely to lead to even higher prices, not just for the price of oil, but as it makes its way through the economy. For most people, they're probably not aware of the fact that crude at about $78 a barrel for WTI works out to about 71, 72 cents a liter. The rest is tax and retail margins, as I've mentioned. But it does mean that we are heading in the winter months as things get colder, not just natural gas and propane, but diesel prices are also on the rise. At the beginning of the year, diesel was about $2 a barrel in the United States, $2 for a gallon, I should say. Now pushing a little bit, a lot closer to 261. And the weakening Canadian dollar doesn't help either. A lot of people tend to forget that. But after 30 years of doing this, of predicting gas prices, it's pretty simple to figure out that when a weak Canadian dollar loses ground to the U.S. greenback, prices of energy go up. Let me put this in perspective. Across Canada today, the variance being whether you have a GST of 5% or an HST of 13%, or in Quebec a TQS of 14.975 or 15% Atlantic Canada, you're losing about 28 cents purchase power on average in Canada. So anybody who thinks the Canadian dollar being weak is a cool thing, better think again. It's destroying affordability. It has a lot to do with the federal government's decision, along with its buddies in the bloc, the Greens and the NDP, to stop building pipelines. Because we're not getting our resources to international markets, our number one generator of revenue and also big trendsetter as far as gas prices are concerned and the value of the Canadian dollar. Because that continues to be a problem, we can't sell to the rest of the world. Next week, we'll find out what tariffs really mean, because we can't sell that spare oil to other countries because we've blocked pipelines. This has been a real maddening policy, and I don't blame Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, one bit. When the rest of Canada has been swatting you in the face several times as Alberta and its resources, it's kind of rich for them to come back and say, we have to Team Canada approach. Yeah, where the hell were you 10 years ago when the country needed you? Look, I'm from Eastern Canada, and I served as a Liberal member of Parliament, fought the oil industry. But when it comes to bad public policy, green policies advocated by Justin Trudeau and, yes, the Mark Carneys and, the Chrystia Freelands of this world, who temporarily will hold that seat and continue to manage to throttle the country, you have to kind of ask why the country accepted having people destroying our resources and our prosperity and our standard of living. And that's showing up every single day in their standard of living with a low Canadian dollar. Expect prices to go a little higher this time next week, and we will talk to you a little bit more about that at that time. Thanks again, Teresa.
After years of rumors, gaming giant Nintendo has confirmed its newest console. The Nintendo Switch 2 will be released in 2025. In a promotional video, it shows that the next generation of the console includes an additional USB-C port. It also shows the system's controllers, or Joy-Cons, now attached to the side of the main unit rather than slide in. I'm Teresa Skubik. Good night, Canada.